Hello and welcome, I'm Tafara Gadamu. Volunteerism has become an interesting subject set afloat here in Ethiopia. And with so many challenges cropping up all along, the role volunteers could play is being revisited. My guest today, Dr. Fallek Etadele, himself a volunteer with many organizations here in this country, underscores the need for more conversation and reflection on this subject. Everyone, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
This is a Volunteers Week per se, right? You also volunteer, right? You're involved in with the Ethiopian Red Cross Society. You are one of the board members of one of the universities. Is that Debre Tabor University? Exactly. And
Forum for Social Studies.
Forum for Social Studies and so on and so forth. So
CCRDA.
CCRDA for what? For 4 years you were?
2 terms, yeah, more than that, I think.
So volunteerism is something quite remote for us, right? I mean, in terms of in the way it is structured these days, is it not? Although it's in our DNA as Ethiopians, of course, yes.
Yeah, I think I don't want to complicate by saying what volunteerism is, but as you know, if we take it to our soul, so which means that the fundamental principle for being a human is to be a human for others, to live for others. That makes us a unique animal and a social behavior animal. Therefore, I think for human, that is the fundamental act. And as you know, volunteerism, especially in Ethiopia and the rest of Africa, or the South, as you see, is an egalitarian society whereby it is part of the social fabric of the societies across all borders, across all communities. But as you know, the professionalization of volunteerism has taken shape after First World War, and that is globalized through the formation of movements like Red Cross, Red Crescent. So it is a pleasure to be really a volunteer, because that gives you satisfaction more than money, and it gives you also a purpose for living. So it is an important element of human beings.
Well, what does it take to be a volunteer in its modern sense, in its current sense? I mean, there are a billion volunteers in the world. That's what the statistics reveals, right?
Yeah, we were told that the statistics shows that there are about 1 billion volunteers, but these are the formally registered volunteers. I can imagine that could be 3 or 4 folds. And in the Ethiopian case also, if you go into any rural communities, if not also where you go into urban communities where you grown up, always people don't call it that I volunteer to you, but they respose and they do a lot of things in kind, in time. So what happened is, as a society grows, as urbanization and so-called modernization came into human life, then polarization, individualism, and virtualism and selfishness came to dominate daily life. But what happened is, the old-time volunteerism comes out of belonging to a society, being part of the society. As a result, you get satisfaction because it is egalitarian obligation for you to be a member of that community. But when it comes to the modern open, then money was the driving force. But what happened now is, as you know, globally we have been in crisis, a lot of polarization where money cannot play all. Therefore, the values of having volunteers from one community to our community within a community becomes phenomenal, because especially as crises are emerging across all the parts of the world, we have seen that volunteers are the ones on the front line to rescue the survivors. And the statistics shows that 80% of all the survivors in major crises were rescued by volunteers, not by paid professional workers, aid workers.
Which means volunteers all around, they can reach out to people in need. Is that why?
Yeah, I think it is beyond the duty call. It is beyond duty call. It is beyond payroll call. It means that it is a passion within you, and you wanted to sacrifice and get other people have safer life. Therefore, they step in and they go and rescue.
But passion alone could never make any difference. There are other factors to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that is one aspect of it, because it was all pronounced during crisis time, but that's where humans feel as human, where you step in, but volunteerism throughout the last 80, 90 years has emerged into all sectors. You can't be a volunteer for anything. And the Ethiopian Red Cross, as you know, is the first, I think, voluntary organization in the Ethiopian.
Women make an important segment of volunteers across the world.
The global statistics shows that globally all volunteers, majorities are women, and in the African context, you see that most of the participants and the volunteers are women. Most of the volunteerism comes through informal institutions, informal way of arrangement. If you have formally a resettlement site, say in the Ethiopian current context, IDP shelter, you may see men registering and so on, but most of the cooking, most of the free food, most of the care, most of the love comes from women. And maybe that is from caring heart of the women, and they are mothers, and they are also family heads behind the screen. Therefore, the statistics show that, okay, that because they don't also, at the same time, you see, this is not something that requires big money to be paid for where green pasture is going on. Therefore, you see that they are very much committed to institutions and to phenomena that can give them life satisfaction than money. Therefore, you see how they go into those contributions.
Let's look at it from the Ethiopian context. I mean, there are disasters and shocks of many forms in this country. Anywhere between 1.5 to 2 million people are displaced in Ethiopia. I mean, this is too much of a shock for the Ethiopian state structure.
Right.
I would guess that volunteers are involved.
Yeah, I think to some extent you are true. This is a new phenomenon in the Ethiopian history because this almost over 2 million internally displaced people means that it is as equal as those displacements maybe in the Middle East, in most of the Middle East countries. Then you see that the Ethiopian Red Cross volunteers, that's what I know mostly, have been really the front runners in terms of accessing resources, giving stabilization, comfort and safety for most of the IDPs. And recently we have seen that where youngsters have come together to mobilize resources and at the same time work along within the local Red Cross societies. And you can see in the nearby here in Shoa, like the Gurage, Masgal area, you see also youngsters in Benshangul and also around Raya where they come up to support. That's very important because this doesn't really require a lot of structure, so to say. It should be fast responders. But what they did is really they gave comfort for people.
What did they do?
Yeah, I think first it is accessing materials for the daily survival of the IDPs, the internally displaced people. Therefore, they collected all those accessed by Red Cross have been distributed freely and fairly to all the displaced people. Then they have been engaged 24 hours, 7 days in a week, just to be on standby and providing essential services, being cooking materials or essential goods or water and the like. And we have seen also that shows the solidarity. We are very happy that there is this social fabric because whenever you are in a risk and at a risk situation, you are always comforted by people who can be close to you physically than people who give you money from a distance. So people do value that, and we are happy that the youngsters and the young population have been engaged in that worthwhile humanitarian activity.
Interesting, but that's about it. That's what volunteers can do. Right. They cannot replace the government, can they?
No, they should not be too. So that's what the major finding is for us. Still, we have been covering a very small percentage of volunteers given the youth population in our country. So we have, my assessment is that we only manage to cover like 0.05% of the potential youth to be volunteers. So what I think is that we should expand this good practice across the board, and particularly now, instead of also what we have learned from this experience, instead of also accessing essential goods and materials or services, it is good that the principle of Red Cross being inculcated in the mind and practice of the young population, which means that humanity first, impartiality, integrity, that helps the society to be bound together and sustain forever as resilient communities. We will not be fragile if we inculcate the principle of Red Cross across the board with technical capacities for use to give service to others.
The Red Cross Society here in Ethiopia is a fairly well-established organization, one of the oldest, as you just tried to suggest, organizations here, right?
Right.
It's pretty robust, but it faces all kinds of challenges.
Right.
One of them would be like the one you just mentioned, resources.
So we have understood that there is a huge potential in Ethiopia, because it is really daunting to see that a lot of senior people with technical expertise across all sectors, literally, are able to do a lot of things, but we don't use them. We don't have a simple system, because as you know, in Ethiopia we don't have, let alone Red Cross. There is no a dropping center for volunteers, as you know, that you can email or access any door knock and find out something that can utilize yours. So I think Red Cross, and in collaboration with government, particularly the disaster risk management component, where our core values are focusing on, we feel that there is a role, coordination role, where we should have a boost in terms of mobilizing larger youth population to volunteer. And what my suggestion in the study that I produced was just a simplified system that would access users to be able to volunteer in areas where they think they could contribute and have value too. But that doesn't mean that there is sporadic and ongoing activities here and there, but we wanted it really to be a reboost in terms of encouraging a lot of youth people to volunteer in whatever sector they want to.
So who else besides the Red Cross is involved in helping mitigate the crisis that we face today? I'm talking about IDPs.
Yeah, I think a lot of actors are there from international
volunteers.
Yeah, by the way, we have also what we call international volunteers who are coming through various organizations here.
Some of them are very well paid, and they remain.
I don't think so. Of course, I'm not arguing that it is free of money, but what you could have done as a consultant for $500, maybe you will get a volunteer that can fairly survive with $50, and you cannot claim that you have paid that. Therefore, that is the principle. But the added value is you will have a volunteer working in a very fragile context, sacrificing their life, but constructing water pipe system to rural or pastoralist communities. That's the kind of volunteers that we have across sister organizations, be it from Canada or US or other European countries. So you see that helping, but at the same time, Ethiopia has a very good national disaster risk management policy, which was launched and triggered by the formation of the National Commission for Disaster Risk Management. And one of the framework allows that we should mobilize volunteers, and volunteer system should be a vehicle to help all ordinary citizens to stand by. Especially community resilience is before crisis comes, to help our fragile or vulnerable communities bounce back after shock and lead better life. So in that case, we have seen a huge experience in tree planting, huge experience in flood protection schemes in the rural setting. We have seen also a lot of water and sanitation, as well as environmental campaigns being conducted. But what we are saying is we have a huge potential to multiply that into millions and millions. And if I think of 1 million youth in Ethiopia as a potential, it means that you will have a full force trained 100,000 people full time. So what does it mean?
I know you raised a very important point, but I guess all these interventions are seasonal. At some point, someone will say, let's plant trees. You go ahead and plant trees.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah.
And next time it will be a different, you pick up a different subject and you do some kind of volunteer work along that. You don't maintain, you don't sustain those initiatives. I think that's what the main problem that we face in these countries as far as volunteers are concerned. Am I on the correct track?
It might be. It has some element of truth.
It's just like a fad.
Yeah, it might have some element of truth, but at the same time, it is not entirely true, because what we are suggesting and what I am suggesting is community resilience initiative requires something to be built from bottom up. And we don't need to have a separate structure. You know, we have the Dabos, the Kres, the Wamfels, or the Afoshas, others.
These are the local institutions.
Which really bounded by volunteerism, reciprocity, and mutual support. Therefore, I think along with that, rather than using a formal structure, Red Cross Society and other structures at local level, rather than having an ad hoc committee and also having a campaign sort of work on it, they could see what are the risks to the environment, to the people in the area. Once they have identified the priorities area, then you can volunteer it. You don't need only to come in July or August, but this should not be seasonal. It should not be 8 hours. So whatever type and hours and sector of activities, it can be done at local level. So I'm advocating is that we don't need to wait and have a huge policy, a huge structure, a huge staffing. Let's be simple, have a dropping center of volunteers across all communities. And we can start from championing communities where others can learn this. And there is a seed on the ground through Red Cross projects, be it in Oromia or Amhara or Tigray or Benshangul Gumuz. So I think the seed is there, but simplification and openness, as well as also simplification and value of users to come as part of the management is important, I think.
Yeah. Do you foresee some kind of perfect synergy between volunteers, which is basically a territory of non-governmental organizations or non-governmental institutions or whatever you want to call them, and the government on the other side?
So you mean
because these institutions are pretty flexible and they react quite quick to, for example, disasters, as you have mentioned earlier on. While the government structure is probably a little bit impregnable and sluggish and so on. So do you foresee some kind of synergy?
Yeah, maybe I cannot generalize that it is less flexible all the time, but there was an opening statement yesterday through the Ethiopian the Federal Ministry for Women, Children and Youth Affairs, where the youth section was having a strategy for volunteerism and encouraging volunteers, and a lady from Foreign Affairs also mentioning about mobilizing the diaspora, which both are, I think, thinking from bigger picture point of view the same thing, I think. So what I see, there is openness to work with non-governmental organizations, but I emphasized in my reflection paper that there should be a strong coordination, and a strong coordination should not be expected from top officials. I think at local level, if we are close to the problem, you know what is a problem, a burning issue in your neighborhood, then people around that, if they take initiative and use those institutions as an entry point, then you can call up and demand local government to come in, the private sector to support it, because it's a moral duty. So we will not be perfect, we will not be flexible everywhere, but I think we can start in those areas, we can build on those areas.
So are you talking about some kind of consultation, periodic consultation at every level?
Yeah, and especially at grassroots level. That's where people make difference, and that's where people feel the value of it, and that's what is different in the NGO. In the NGO circle, in the non-profit sector, we come from bottom up and want us to change or influence policies, while the reverse is true for government. So I feel that when we see government, local government is the most important aspect. This is where the Kabbales are doing things, because the Kabbales should not shut themselves into a structure that they inherited. They should be very flexible enough to allow youth, women, as you said, and all those institutions to work independently, respecting their autonomy without using or misusing them. So if there is that kind of collaboration, I think there will be a confidence. And in volunteerism, what I have learned is if you do the first thing with confidence, the second thing is very, very good and will be better. So as you said, from being reactive to a situation of IDP as we speak, so we need to be proactive. To be proactive means that we need to do the first project together.
So you seem to suggest that Kabbales are pretty hard to deal with, right?
Yeah, I think from my study of institutions and lack of even NGOs transformative social process in the Ethiopian context, because they stick into a very formal and sometimes ideologically loaded organization, which have depressed and in some cases crushed the traditional potential organization, and that's what westernization, modernization is for that matter, then I'm suggesting that those institutions have been crushed and those institutions should be given the forum They have their own limitation, but to harmonize and work together hand in hand. That's where people's power is, where people's trust is.
It's interesting because you're viewed with some kind of suspicion as the NGOs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think that people who view you that way have some legitimate reasons?
It is not about suspicion. This is a track record of what we have been in. And this is not only endemic to Ethiopia. This is pandemic to all African so-called civilization, because African civilization inherited the legal, the institutional system of the West, and that is, we are not either Western or we are not either Africans and traditional or indigenous in the sense. So we are mixed somewhere that didn't lead us to really a transformative process. So what I'm saying is, yes, if we do value, as you know, the Ubuntu principle of African, we are the first that look into people as human, regardless of whatever ideological or color or geographical locations you have. So we have institutions to support that, but those institutions were old enough to have the wisdom before the UN or NGOs, most of the NGOs were formed.
But people view you as coming with your own baggage, right?
Yeah.
Coming here to influence local initiatives and so on.
So that's why we are saying that the Red Cross movement, especially which is working independently with its own chapter, but as an auxiliary to government, is a unique structure where we mobilize humans because they are humans wherever they are. And the volunteerism is an instrument and an envelope for that to grow. Therefore, what I'm advocating is we shouldn't stick to Western type of structure as such, and we shouldn't stick to also formal institutions that are loaded with different procedures, tools, and ideologies. But it doesn't mean that they are very important to the ultimate goal of serving humanity. So what I'm saying is all institutions should grow together. And that is where the people power is. Otherwise, if you think of peace and stability, we can't challenge, because it is not the Ministry of Peace that should bring peace at the end. It is people, it is you, it is individual. So those institutions are the ones who have been making peace and will be making peace to themselves and to others. Therefore, unless you have a harmonized structure to hear to their voice and help them to work out, then your structure may not be the right way to respond. If it responds, it might be ad hoc and reactive.
And what are the challenges you think volunteerism in this country faces?
First thing, I think we are not open in our system, or our formal structures are so closed. That's why whenever I travel everywhere...
Do you mean that volunteers are viewed with suspicion?
No, I think, let's think of the national ones. For instance, we have 50,000 youngsters graduating every year. And I wonder why they wait a year or 2 years to get jobs. That is a formal job. But the voluntary service is the informal job that gives them experience to themselves, knowledge, new knowledge, but at the same time that helps them to serve the mission of knowledge. Therefore, I haven't seen offices anywhere I go saying that we have really a vacancy, we have a dropping center for volunteers who can do this. And the other day I was surprised by one interview I was hearing, and this an official was saying that we were trying to have a caretaker like promoting gender equality, but promoting really maternity leave by having a daycare within the office, a federal office of ministry. And the person was saying that we don't have budget to have baby caretaker and also games and toys. And I feel that thousands of nurses or educationalists are coming out without job. And I haven't seen really an opportunity for those. So what I'm saying is one challenge is for most Ethiopians, I cannot generalize, we are so closely in our system. So openness, flexibility to accept that is one important. The second is we consider it is cheap. When we consider volunteerism, it is not only people with less knowledge. It is also about really tapping the rich experience of senior citizens in this country. Look how many diplomats we have, how many business people we have. You came across many good Ethiopians that can serve the globe, let alone this nation. But I don't see ministries really bringing those as volunteers to help them in various social implementation, policy implementation procedure. So we are wasting our resources. That makes me to be convinced that our development is not because of lack of resources. It is just because we misuse the resource that we have.
Well, quite an option there. Thank you very much, Dr. Falake. It was really a pleasure having you on my show.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.